Hi guys, James back with another video, and this one I was very excited about because I've been working on this one for I guess a few weeks now. Mostly because I had to get around to watching all the movies that I wanted to include on this list. And several of them came from Google Play. And if you clicked on it, you know that this is Time Travel Movies Part 2. And I had done a search. I had watched a time travel movie, and it had a list of movies along the bottom that were similar to it, and a lot of them seemed intriguing, and I picked them up. And they're more than intriguing. I think this list overall might be better than Time Travel Movies Part 1. As a whole, I mean, it doesn't have the top 3 that I had for that one, which was the miniseries that I call a long movie, 11/22/63, or Time Lapse, or Project Almanac. But overall, out of the 10, I think it has overall a better list. We'll see if you agree. And now, similar to the last list, there are several on here. It's time travel as a whole, time travel movies in general, but there are certain ones on here that, similar to the first list, like Time Lapse, where it's not exactly time travel. It could be two people communicating across time, or there's some sort of going back in time element to it, or going in the future. Like Time Lapse had the machine that spit out photos from 24 hours from now. And I have a few on here that bear similarities to movies like Frequency or The Lake House, where you have two people living in two different times communicating, and their actions affecting each other. So, just so you know where I'm coming from. So without further ado, we will start with number 10. Number 10 is a film from 2015. It's one of the raunchy sex comedies called Premature. And this is sort of a raunchy take on Groundhog Day. This one, let's see, stars John Carna, Katie Findlay, Craig Roberts, Carlson Young, Adam Riegler, who largely the cast I hadn't seen before, with the exception of the young guy, like John Carna's the guy who plays his dad. But you have a cameo actor who's in a few scenes, played by Alan Tudyk from Firefly. He plays a representative from Georgetown University, where the character of Rob is supposed to go to post-secondary education. And the movie starts with him waking up after having sort of a wet dream, and his mom walks in, and he's all embarrassed and stuff like that. Then he gets up, gets a speech from his dad about his Georgetown interview, and goes to school. And he sort of has an issue with, you could say, premature ejaculation. And from this first day on, at some point during the day, something's going to cause him to have an orgasm. And when he does, he passes out, wakes up after having a wet dream, and his mom walks in the door. The day, and it turns out that the day has restarted. And this happens about 7 or 8 times throughout the movie, and he doesn't know why. But it's a situation where he's got a best friend, but he's also got another best friend who's a girl who they've always been close friends. But it's one of those, she's perfect for him, but nobody's ever realized it. Neither of them has ever realized it, and he's lusting after the hot girl in school who he tutors, who he just wants for sex or whatever. So it's one of those. It's the Groundhog Day plot device wrapped around something like an American Pie kind of movie. So, but it was very funny. And Alan Tudyk, I'd say was I could say the highlight of the movie. His scenes, because he has keeps having the same Georgetown interview with him, and Alan Tudyk's character keeps breaking down and crying because he met his wife at Georgetown and then she died, and then so the interview constantly never goes well. Anyway, very funny movie. Premature. Number 9, we have a film from 2011 called 1,000 Kisses Deep. And I think it had a different name originally. I can't remember what it said. Originally called The Veil of Maya. The main character's name is Maya, played by Jodie Whittaker, who's the current iteration of Doctor Who. And it also stars Dougray Scott and David Warner. And this Jodie Whittaker plays Maya Selva. And the title of 1,000 Kisses Deep comes from the poem written by Leonard Cohen, which he turned into a song, 1,000 Kisses Deep. And they added it in post-production where you have Jodie Whittaker... Jodie Whittaker reciting lines from the poem/song over the intro to the movie, and then I believe you have Dougray Scott reciting a few verses of it over the closing of the movie. But I think it works. I'm listening to the poem and it's like, oh man, that's the song 1,000 Kisses Deep, which I'm a big fan of. Anyway, Maya works odd hours. She gets a box of personal effects after her mom has passed away, and she passes an old woman on the street who goes into her building, an old woman who lives in her building upstairs. And while she's standing outside, all of a sudden she sees pieces of paper, photos fall onto the pavement. She walks away, and then splat, the old woman like dove out her window and committed suicide and landed right on the pavement right by her. And so she picks up one of the photos, and it's a picture of it's Dougray Scott who's playing Ludwig, who was a semi-famous jazz musician, and who is also an ex-boyfriend of hers, several doomed relationships they had together. And she talks to the building's super, played by David Warner, and wonders about the old woman. He's like, well, you work odd hours, you never saw her. Nobody really knew anything about her. She was very quiet, kept to herself. So she talks him into letting her into her apartment, where she finds certain items that look familiar to her, including a photo, and as well as a note written to where it says to Maya. Well, this is in the old woman's apartment, and her name is Maya, so it's Ludwig writing to her. But how is that possible? This is an old woman. And David Warner's character, the super, Max, seems like he's been working in that building a while. Tells her she needs to put that note back. Time is out of joint. You don't really know what he's talking about. And they get on the elevator in the building, and it starts to go down. She wants to go up, and he goes, well, this elevator has a mind of its own. We just have to get off when it stops. And the movie gets very weird from there, but it seems like using this elevator, and with the help from Max, she keeps going back through different points in the older Maya's life, who is also played by Jodie Whittaker, because you see her younger, having this relationship with Ludwig. And I will stop there, because it keeps going back and back and back and back and revealing more about the story, more about herself and the old woman. and it's fascinating where it ends up. It is. So I will stop there. That is 1,000 Kisses Deep. Number 8, we have a film from 1980 called Somewhere in Time. Now this one I had been aware of since the early 2000s when I worked at Rogers Video, because I would walk through the store and see this VHS. It's a Christopher Reeve, Jane Seymour movie about a guy receiving an old pocket watch from an old woman. She walks up to him and says, "Come back to me," and then leaves. And he becomes very curious and ends up going back in time. Now what happens is, it's Christopher Reeve playing Richard Collier, who's a playwright, and the old woman approaches him after one of his successful plays debuts, gives him the watch and says, "Come back to me." And she goes back to her room in the Grand Hotel. It's based on a book called A Bid Time Return. And my girlfriend recently found it on Amazon, and they retitled it Somewhere in Time because that's what the movie's based on. And I think the original book is in the Grand Hotel, but the movie was. And she goes back to her room in the Grand Hotel and subsequently dies. Well, Richard, a few years later, has writer's block for his next. He's stalled on his next play, and he goes to the Grand Hotel to find inspiration. Well, while he's there, he meets the groundskeeper who thinks he recognizes him. He's not sure. He's never been there. How would he recognize him? And he goes into one of the room with all these old artifacts, old mementos and stuff, and sees this. He's captivated by this picture. This picture of Jane Seymour's character. Her name is Elise McKenna. And he's captivated by the picture and finds out her name and stuff. And through some research that he conducts around the hotel, he finds out that she grew up to be the old woman that had approached him. And he also finds out that the pocket watch that she gave to him was a very treasured memento of hers, and she never would have parted with it, and she tells him that she has died. And he also notices a book that was written by an old professor of his about time travel, and said like she was fascinated with this book. She read it over and over again. And he goes to speak to the professor, who is very cautious to relay any information to him, but he tells him that only for a split second he felt himself travel back in time when he was on vacation in Italy, just because of the location and the mindset he was in. He was focusing. So he goes back to the Grand Hotel and he finds an old register and finds out that he had in fact checked in. So he tests the theory after several attempts, and he's able to travel back in time to meet Elise McKenna. And it's sort of one of those things where he finds stuff that only could have happened if he had gone back in time. So he goes back in time and creates those events. So that's as far as I'll go with this one. Beautiful movie. Great soundtrack, great acting, story. Even better the second time you watch it, because I kind of got dozy towards the end. So I got a lot more out of it the second time. Anyway, Somewhere in Time. Number 7, we have a film from 2010, Canadian movie called Repeaters. And this is a movie by Carl Basai, Canadian director, who he did a vampire movie called Embrace the Vampire, which was okay. Did a movie with Carrie-Anne Moss called Normal, which I have, but I haven't watched yet. But most notable to me was the film, one of his his feature film debut was a film called Johnny, starring Chris William Martin, about a street hustler who has his own gang, and it was rumored to be the very first Canadian film shot in the style of Dogma 95 that Lars von Trier and Thomas Vinterberg and others pioneered. Anyway, did this film in 2010 called Repeaters. Excuse me. And this is another one that uses the Groundhog Day plot device. You get three younger, like 20-somethings in rehab. And you've got, it's Dustin Milligan, Amanda Crew, and Richard DeClercq playing Kyle, Sonia, and Michael, who they just call Weeks. And they're all addicts in rehab. And they go through the events of one day. Sonia finds out that her dad has died, who she was not close with. Weeks goes to visit his dad in prison, who hates him, blames him for costing him 10 years in prison, never wants to see him again, wants to kill him or whatever. And Kyle tries to go to his sister's school and connect with his sister, who doesn't want to speak to him. So they all have a personal relationship that is strained, to say the least. And then that night, they're all, like, Weeks is in the shower, Sonia is in the rec room, I think, and Kyle is in his room, and they all do something that has something to do with electricity, and they all get electrocuted by this violent storm, just the three of them. And they wake up the next day, and they've repeated the day. They soon discover that the day is repeating. So, in typical Groundhog Day kind of fashion, they decide to try their luck and see if they can do whatever they want. They get together and they torture a drug dealer who may be messing with Kyle's sister, kidnap and torture him. They rob a liquor store, they get wasted at a bar without paying, and then they realize that this is kind of self-destructive behavior, and they want to try and figure out why this is happening to them, and seeing if they can actually connect with their family members that have the strained relationships and try and make things better. You try something, the day repeats. Well, let's try this, and the day repeats. The problem is Weeks, the other friend, Michael Weeks, he takes it to the extreme with them messing around. He gets more and more, I'm just going to say it's psychotic. He sexually assaults a girl, he kills a couple of cops, he just gets worse and worse and worse, and he doesn't understand why they aren't joining him, just doing whatever the hell he wants. There's no consequences. He doesn't care that the day keeps repeating. He enjoys it. They want to stop it. So it's two of them trying to solve the problem that they're in, and one of them who just wants to keep causing havoc. And it has a very, very intense vibe going through it, and a very intense ending. So I will stop there. That is Repeaters. Number 6, we have a film from 2013 called The Lovers. And this one stars Josh Hartnett, Bollywood star Bipasha Basu, who I'd never seen before, Tamsin Egerton, Alice Englert, let me see, a lot of British actors, a lot of Indian actors that I didn't recognize. But you got Tamsin Egerton and Josh Hartnett playing a couple who are also, I don't know if they're not deep sea, no, they're marine archaeologists, and they find this wreckage and these valuable items that are down below, and they're trying to get them loose, and they can't quite get to them. It's too deep, too dangerous. Well, one night, her character's name is Laura. Josh plays Jay. And Laura gets out of bed and rigs herself up and goes down to the bottom of the ocean to the rig and gets trapped there under some wreckage. Jay gets up and free dives down there to free her. Hook on a rope so they can pull the wreckage off her. Well, that works. They bring her up, and he starts to drown. So they get him up, do CPR, bring him back to life, and he thinks he's fine. And all of a sudden, he starts to cough up blood, and then he falls into a coma. And while he's in a coma, the time drifts back to, where does it drift back to? 1778 in India, where all of a sudden Josh Hartnett is playing a Scottish soldier in the British Army that is occupying India. And you have Tulaja Naik, played by Bipasha Basu, and she's good friends with the princess. There's a whole power struggle and a coup going on, and he's escorting her and the princess to safety. And a large part of the movie takes place in this alternate version way back in time. And it's a gorgeous, gorgeous movie. And there's brief flashes back to the present because he's unresponsive. He's in a coma, and Laura is deciding whether or not to pull the plug. And there's the title "The Lovers" comes from this ring that splits into two, and there's a narration at the beginning and the end by this one actor who talks about the lovers, and like if the rings are separated and given to each of these two people, they'll always be drawn back to each other and be connected. And that does play an important part towards the end of the movie, which I won't say because it's gorgeous. Gorgeous movie. Directed by Roland Joffe. So, that is The Lovers. Number 5, we have a film from 2011 called Touchback. Now, this is a football film which has a sort of It's a Wonderful Life plot device. You got Brian Presley playing Scott Murphy, who was a high school football star who was injured at the end of the state championships where they won. He broke his leg horribly, ended his career, and then it flashes forward several years to where he's married, has 2 kids, still walks with a leg brace, he's put on weight, he's struggling to keep his farm afloat and his family together, and his glory days are long behind him, and he's going to lose the farm, going to lose his, doesn't really, well, his job is the farm, but his life is going nowhere, and he decides to kill himself. So he goes off on a back road and rigs a tube from the tailpipe into the window and passes out. Well, he passes out, and all of a sudden, screen goes white, and all of a sudden, his buddy is banging on the window, telling him we got to get to school. Well, all of a sudden, he's back. How many years is it? Goes back to 1991. Present day. Well, it's like present day. Say it's 2011. Goes back to 1991. So probably like 10, 20 years. Maybe like 10 years. Probably 10 years, I think. And he gets to relive, goes back to like the week before the big state championship. And all of a sudden he's like, how did I get back here? And he's trying to do things, live his life right this time, and try to correct all the mistakes he made that led to his dismal life that he finds so disappointing now. And so he's reconnecting with his high school girlfriend. the girl in school who's in the band who ended up becoming his wife, but who barely knows him in high school, and his coach. Now you have his wife, played by Melanie Lynskey. The coach is Kurt Russell. Best friend is Mark Blucas. Christine Lottie plays his mom. James Duval is in there. And Sarah Wright. And I thought the first half of the movie was good. Second half of the movie is outstanding. So the movie ends up being great. And it's one of those, if you had the chance to go back and do it all over again, would you? Or what would you change? And would you... I don't want to spoil anything. It's a beautiful movie, great country soundtrack and rock, and awesome performances. So that is Touchback. Very big It's a Wonderful Life vibe in this one. Okay, number 4, we have a film from 2013 called I'll Follow You Down. And this one does involve time travel, definitive time travel, where you have husband, wife, son. Rufus Sewell, Gillian Anderson are a married couple, and they have their son. So it's Gabe. Rufus Sewell plays Gabe, and he's a physicist, and Gillian Anderson plays his wife Marika, and he's going on a trip to Princeton. They live in Toronto. He's going on a trip to Princeton to do some work, and they leave him at the airport. He flies there. He's supposed to come back. They're waiting at the airport, but he never arrives. He's disappeared. And it's a few days later, they go and contact her father, played by Victor Garber, who actually set them up when they were younger, because he was gay. Gabe was one of his prized students. He's a professor, and he spoke to him right after he got off the plane, but never heard from him again. He just helped set him up in his workspace, and then he disappeared. Well, fast forward 12 years, and you've got the young son Errol, who's grown up, now played by Haley Joel Osment, and he's a brilliant man who dabbles in theoretical physics, and the mom has become a professor and an artist, and she's perpetually depressed, has tried to commit suicide a few times because she's never stopped loving her husband, and has never been able to accept his possible death. It's not knowing what happened to him, why he never came home. And so Errol and the grandfather, Sal, he has a theory that the father isn't dead. He actually traveled back in time because of stuff that Gabe left behind. Notes and items that were left in the workspace. And Errol doesn't believe it, and isn't sure that he can commit to going back and changing things, resetting the timeline. That's Sal's theory. That go back there, bring him back, and none of this will ever happen. Life will be as it should have been. And because he has a girlfriend now, and she becomes pregnant, and so he's going to have a family. And if he goes back and resets all that, how will there's no guarantee that he'll meet her, that he'll be together with her again. It may end up completely different. But he wants to go back because his mom ends up committing suicide. So he loses his mom, he's lost his dad, and he doesn't want to lose his girlfriend. I can't remember if they actually they're planning on getting married. Then they lose the baby. She miscarries. So now he's become convinced that this is not how life is supposed to be. I need to go back and reset all this because my father may have died. Well, he does actually find out that his father did die because he finds an old article with a photo of a mugging where they killed this unidentified man, and the only thing that left was like keys in his left pocket and a pocket watch, which was his father's. He was like, okay, I need to go back in time, save my father, and bring him back. And that's where I'll stop at that one because it's super intriguing and very, very well done. So that is I'll Follow You Down. Okay, number 3, we have a film from 2019, which I think made in 2019, released last year. And this was the latest film by Justin Benson and Aaron Moorhead, who did Spring, Resolution, and The Endless. So this was kind of like their time travel movie, where you get Anthony Mackie and Jamie Dornan, and they play paramedics. And Jamie Dornan's daughter, they're in New Orleans. Jamie Dornan's daughter disappears, and Anthony Mackie investigates to help his best friend out, and discovers that these kids are taking this drug called Synchronic. And what this drug actually can do is send you back in time, where depending on where you're standing, you will go back to a certain point in the past. It could be the Stone Age, it could be Revolutionary War, it could be the Civil War, it could be Depression era, or something like that. You could go into another room and you go back to a different point in time, as you would if you're, say, sitting right here. And what they do with very awesome special effects is he'll take the pill and the camera starts panning around the room, and the walls and stuff, posters that you can see, would start to melt away, and all of a sudden, they do this with where he goes back to a swamp, and you see literally the walls start to dissolve, and you see a swamp, and all of a sudden his feet are in the water, and then it keeps going around, and he's in the swamp. Now, he takes the pill, and the catch is he has to be back in that exact spot, or at least in that very, very small area, in order to get back to his own time. Because there's one scene where he takes his dog back with him. He conducts all these experiments to test what the drug can do, and the dog accidentally gets away from him. So he gets back to, I think it's a couch, and that brings him back to his present time. And he looks out the window, and the dog is right there, just panting through the window, looking at him. And the dog starts to shimmer, and then disappears. The dog got stuck back there in the 50s. Now, in the director's commentary, they go, now we've had a lot of people comment on this. The dog is fine. The dog didn't die. The dog is fine. He's just running around back in 1950s. But he still lost his dog. And so he has to find a way back to the particular time, that particular place where the daughter disappeared, so he can go back to that particular time and bring her back so his friend can be reunited with his daughter. And it's a brilliant movie, and awesome starring role for Anthony Mackie. So my favorite film of Benson and Moorhead is still Spring, and Synchronic might be tied with The Endless, and then Resolution's at the bottom, but I love how they do connect all 4 of the movies in some way. That is Synchronic. Okay, number 2, film from 2019 called Don't Let Go. This movie is intense. It is awesome. This is one of the ones that has sort of a connection with like Frequency in the Lake House, where 2 people at 2 different times communicating. So you have David Oyelowo plays Jack, who's a cop, and he's very close with his niece, played by Storm Reed. And her parents, played by Brian Tyree Henry, and Chanel Azoro. Those are the parents of Storm Reed's character, Ashley Radcliffe. David Oyelowo plays Jack Radcliffe because his brother, played by Brian Tyree Henry. He's very close with his niece and meets with her, and then like a day or two later, he gets a frantic call from Ashley, his niece, and then the phone disconnects, and he doesn't know what's going on. He decides he's curious. He goes over to the house, finds his brother dead, his brother's wife dead, and his niece dead in the bathtub, and their dog. Unfortunately, this happens in the first 10 minutes, and he's distraught. They have the funeral, and then a few days later, a couple weeks, he gets a call. He gets a call from what is supposedly his niece's phone, from Ashley's phone. And she starts saying, it's her voice saying, hello, hello. He's like, who is this? Who do you think it is? And he ends up just not saying anything. She hangs up. She tries to call him again. And then the third time, he starts talking to her, and he's convinced it is Ashley. However, she's still alive. And he asks her what day it is, because he says he can't read the date on his phone. And she says it's blah, 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 this date. Well, he's looking at the newspaper, and she is calling from 2 weeks in the past, which is just like 4 or 5 days before she and her family is murdered. So he's trying to keep it under wraps that he's communicating with his dead niece. And as they talk more and more, he asks her, he's like, this is making you sound crazy. Can you go out to your shed, take this spray paint, and spray paint a red X on the door? Don't ask me why, I'll tell you later. And she says she'll do it, and all of a sudden you see the camera, you see the background shake for a second, and he turns around, and there's a red X on the door. So the more they talk and talk and talk, because prior to that she was basically just a voice on the phone, it'll cut between his present day investigating their deaths and her, after communicating with him, doing some investigating for him into some suspicious characters who may eventually try and kill them. So it goes back and forth, and largely communicating between each other, but not with anyone else. And she doesn't understand that she's talking to her uncle 2 weeks in the future after she has already been killed. Because she starts walking by his house while he's talking to her, and he's like, no, they may be watching the house. Do not go towards my house. Walk away. And even if you see me on the street, we just pretend that we don't know what's going on, sort of as a cover, so nobody seems crazy. And weird things start going on, but there's certain things where he'll ask her to do something, or something that she does 2 weeks ago affects the present. Again, you see the camera, you see the background kind of vibrate or shake, and things in the present have changed. And it's never explained how this is happening. It just is. Because he gets shot checking out this one address, and this just random drive-by happens, and he gets shot. And he talks to his niece and gets her to do something, and then all of a sudden he wakes up in a car with his partner, and he hasn't been shot, and things go a different way. Now he ends up getting shot again under different circumstances, so it's sort of like he was meant to get shot, but it just, the circumstances changed. And oh man, so intense. The other guys in the movie, you've got Mykelti Williamson as Bobby, his partner, co-worker in the police force, Alfred Molina as their captain, and I already mentioned the other actors in it. And oh man, this movie is so good. And yeah, I'll stop there. Don't Let Go. I knew this was going to be a good movie from watching the preview, and it was awesome. Number one is a movie from this year, and it is called Long Weekend. And this one stars, it's a small cast. You got Finn Wittrock, Zoe Chow, Damon Wayans Jr., Jim Rash, and a few other actors that I didn't really recognize. And you got Finn Wittrock plays Bart, Zoe Chow plays Vienna, and he broke up with his girlfriend a few years ago, and he's very much in a downward spiral, drinking and stuff like that. Lost his job, trying to get a new job, and he meets. He goes to the movies. He takes a bottle of booze to the movies and gets drunk, passes out while the movie's on, and then Vienna comes and wakes him up. And as they're, he thanks her and leaves, and then she stops him on the street, wondering like, well, I'm new in town. Can you tell me where a good place to go to get a drink? And he goes, well, there's this dive bar, there's this fancy place. And she goes, I'll go to this fancy place. Do you want to come with me? And so he agrees. They go to the bar, and she pulls out this fat wad of cash to pay. He's like, what? Where do you get all that money? Oh, I just don't trust banks and stuff like that. And they meet up several times after that, and he's always wondering why she has carrying around all this cash, and she always blows it off by different excuse, or whatever. But they start to become closer and closer and closer, and his best friend, played by Damon Wayans Jr., is married with kids, and he's staying with them because he's getting evicted from his apartment. And it's sort of like, well, he hangs out with her, and then he hangs out with them. The two don't meet. And that's important for later. Later in the movie. I'm not going to tell you. Just say that for later in the movie. And they become closer and closer and closer. And I think most of the movie takes place over a long weekend, as it were. And he at some point has had enough with like her excuses and the unexplained money. And so she finally levels with him. She's from the future. She traveled to that present from the future. Well, he doesn't believe her. She's trying to tell him things to convince him, but he never quite gets there. And strange things start happening to her that she says is because she's spent too much time in that present. She has to get back to her own time. And what she's doing there is to invest in like certain stocks, I think, so that she goes back to her present time, she'll have money to pay for her mom's cancer treatment. And Zoe Chow and Finn Wittrock do such an amazing job in this movie. And the music is great, and the story they tell without actually using any big special effects, sort of like Primer, where it's a time travel movie, but they don't have to show you any time travel. It's just all about the dialogue and the story they're telling and the acting and stuff. And it's just a beautiful movie, and it's currently my number one of this year. I don't know if it'll stay there, but it's been there since I watched it. I watched it like 2 days in a row, and then I watched it a third time with my girlfriend, and I still love it, and I hope you do too. So that is Long Weekend. And it has an amazing ending, if you ask me, but I won't tell you. Okay, so that is it for this one. Sorry if I went a little long. I just love talking about all 10 of these movies quite a bit. So, like and subscribe, comment, suggestions, all welcome. And I will see you for the next one. Toodles.